The Northmen say that in the beginning there was nothing but darkness. Bitter cold to the north, fiery hot to the south. They say the cold formed ice, which melted from the sparks from the south. The power of the darkness gave life to the dripping ice, and the first giant...
To open the gate, you must first face the gods that guard it. The god of fire, Surt, and the god of illusion, Valravn. Spill their blood to open the gate to Helheim and enter the land of the dead.
Valravn, ancestor of the seers and master of ravens. He hunts his prey with his powers of illusion and feasts on their remains. Follow the path to Valravn and defeat him in battle to earn his mark. The gate to Helheim cannot be opened without it.
Ymir was a frost giant, a being of darkness, and all his sons and grandsons were dark after him. Of his daughters and granddaughters, some were monstrous, but others fair. But there was another who came from the ice, Buri. In shape, he was like a man, big and powerful. His son, Bor, took a fair giant to be his wife, and they had 3 sons. Odin was the eldest, and the Northmen hold him to be the foremost of the gods, the All-Father. Illusion hides the path to Valravn. Don't trust your eyes. Find another way to see the truth.
What's that? It's a door. Push it. Push it. Push it. Come on. Come on. Push it. She did it. She did it. She did it. Look.
The Northmen say that in the beginning there was nothing but darkness. Bitter cold to the north, fiery hot to the south. They say the cold formed ice, which melted from the sparks from the south. The power of the darkness gave life to the dripping ice, and the first giant was born, and was named Ymir. The ice continued to drip, and the power of the void gave life to it, and it became a cow, whose milk fed the giant. That's right, a cow. But you weren't expecting that.
Surt, the fire giant has answered. He comes from a land older than mankind, and the Northmen call upon his flaming sword to raze their enemies to the ground. Find him, Senua, and spill his blood.
She found the wretched old fool on her way back from the wilds. An outcast. He was badly burnt all over. She took pity on him, for he was not long for this world. Like her, who spoke of his own darkness. The Northmen.
She can still do it. He's down. Finish it. Finish it. It's not over. It's not over. Do it. Go in. Can't do it. Anticipate the move. Strong. Finish this! Quickly get up! They're coming! Watch out! She's hurt. She's injured. She won't. She's injured. Not gonna make it.
I can still smell it.
The sweet, sickly stench of burning human flesh. And I still hear their cries carried in the wind. You hear them too, Senua?
Yes, I heard their screams, and I still hear them now. Are they screams? The friends.
Screams will help you. Screams. Follow the screams. It's just that. Hide. You'll never find her. The secret is there.
The friends.
Listen, it's too loud. Don't go too close.
You can hear the rooms. Are they screams? The friends.
Follow the screams.
burning human flesh. And I still hear their cries carried in the wind. Do you hear them too, Senua?
Screams will help you.
Sacrifice.
The roots.
Follow the screams. Screams. What is it? Get out! Get out! You fool! Towards the rooms. The rooms are immortal. Screams will help you. Screams. You can hear the rooms. Hear them. Find the rooms. The rooms. Follow the screams. Screams.
Find
What's that sound? Screaming.
Are they screaming?
The rooms.
The rooms.
Screaming. Follow the screams. Screams. The screams towards the rooms. The rooms are immortal. Screams will help you. It's too loud. You can hear the rooms. Rooms. Find the rooms. Follow the screams towards the rooms. The rooms are immortal. What's that sound?
Are they screaming?
Screams will help you. Screams.
Find Focus.
Follow the screams. Screams. Screams towards the rooms. The rooms are immortal. Screams will help you. Screams. What's that sound? Screaming.
Are they screaming?
The rooms.
The rooms.
Screaming. they screaming? Don't go too close. It's too loud. Get out! You fool! It's too loud. It's too loud. It's too loud. Don't go too close. Get out! You fool! Follow the screams. It's too loud. Stop. What's that sound? Are they screaming?
Stormy seas and lost souls.
Who is it?
She's dreamt of this before.
It's coming.
Is it?
They say dreams are visions of our memories, thoughts and fears, as seen by our inner eye. But what if each one of us is always dreaming, even when awake? And we only see what our inner eye creates for us. Is this what hell is? A world shaped by Senua's nightmares. Maybe that's why people fear seeing the world through her eyes.
Yes, she's scared.
Because if you believe that Senua's reality is twisted, you must accept that yours might be too.
Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is a video game about Senua, a Celtic warrior on a vision quest into Viking territory. But what sets our hero Senua apart is that she suffers from severe psychotic mental illness.
He knows she's getting closer. He can feel her coming closer. She's getting closer. They're watching.
The original idea for Hellblade was to create a classic hero's journey, a journey of suffering, but one where the fantasy world is not another planet or alternate universe, but a world that is constructed in Senua's mind. But to do so would mean putting psychotic mental illness at the center of the experience, a subject that is still considered taboo, and a challenge that was both terrifying and exciting in equal measure. In Hellblade, the starting point was a newly discovered Celtic goddess called Senuna in Ashwell, Hertfordshire. When first discovered, her name was thought to be Senua, a name which I liked and kept. I wondered if Senua might have been a Celtic warrior like Boudica who stood up to the Romans. While the Romans had conquered all of Europe, there was a group of Celts up in the furthest reaches of the Roman Empire that could not be conquered, the Picts. And so the Romans built a wall, called Hadrian's Wall, that spans across Britain from sea to sea to keep the Pictish barbarians at bay. The Picts were known for their war paint, painted on with woad, and their matted hair clumped with lime. And so Senua would be a barbarian Pict in this image.
What's your name?
Senua,
I haven't seen you before.
I don't leave home much.
Oh, Zeno's daughter.
I have to go.
Wait.
Orkney is off the coast of Scotland and was inhabited by the Picts, steeped in history and mystery, and so I made Orkney Senua's home and set the stage for a crisis. In the late 8th century, the first Vikings landed on the Orkney Islands. The